located in the capital city of Vermont. And I wanted just to remind everyone today to use the chat box for questions. Eliza Minucci is going to be kind of monitoring the chat box for us. So if you have some questions that pop up for you, please feel free to drop them in the chat box, and Anne and I will Eliza will alert us to some of the questions, not all of them, but alert us, and we'll take a pause in our presentation to answer those questions.
Wonderful to see everybody. I love being able to see people's faces before your faces disappear, because we are recording today. So welcome, and I'll let Amy get started with the first slide.
So we all know what we've been through and what's going on, and here we are rolling into a new season. And I can tell from the chat box, from everybody introducing themselves, that we have a lot of people from northern climates, and regardless of that, the weather changes and presents us with challenges all the time. And again, we've been one of the biggest challenges of any and all of our teaching careers is teaching during COVID. So many of you have months of experience under your belt teaching during COVID, whether it's remotely or outdoors in some kind of outdoor classroom, or even in the school building. And so today's presentation is looking a little bit more closely at how do we meet ourselves and our students outdoors in weather that is colder and is not the bright, sunny days of exploring, without having to kind of have a thought on surviving and thriving in the outdoors. And what Anne and I really want to invite everyone to think about today is that we can do this, and we can do this together. And that's the sole purpose of Inside Outside, is to be a resource for all of you, not only in the Northeast, but throughout the country as well. So we're really excited today to share with you kind of a little bit of a new framework of thinking for Anne and I on how to approach teaching outdoors during colder weather.
Great. So we can do this, and we have been doing this. I know so many of you, as I looked through who is here today. Welcome to all of those of you I've gotten the opportunity and honor to get to know over the past many years. And some of you probably already know that hot off the press is this position statement. You may be familiar with, if we could go back to that position. Yeah, thanks. So we're going to talk about this for a minute, because some of you maybe saw the July position statement that the Inside Outside Advisory Group put together and launched in early July, so that we could be ahead of the curve, really, in helping and supporting teachers to get outdoors in response to COVID. Well, we promised ourselves that we would do the same when winter came. And so winter's here, and we, at least the cold weather of the Northeast region and in the upper regions and Midwest regions of the United States and Canada. So I see we have some Canadian friends on this call as well. So we wanted to be able to produce this position statement so we would have some resources for you. So in this position statement is research, backed up research for administrators, for families, for yourself. And we broke it out into really thinking about winter clothing and gear. Also, ways that you can really organize your activities so that children are moving, and thinking about shelter and the food that perhaps the children are being able to consume either before they come to school, at school, in school lunches, that sort of thing, or in snacks that you may or may not be able to provide in your programs. In addition, materials and equipment section as well, and curricular ideas, and then really a sample schedule. So what could this look like for a few hours or an hour outdoors throughout the winter season?
And you know what I just love about this position statement is, first and foremost, it's a volunteer effort by many, many, many people, right? We see a need, and like many of us as teachers and educators, we put in time above and beyond, especially right now. So I just love that about this piece, is that it's not a single voice, it's many voices that come to this. The other thing I love about it is it's a front and back, if you want to photocopy it that way. And it's for administrators, teachers, parents, community members, anybody, any kind of interest group that wants to be spending more time outdoors during the colder months. So it's accessible, it's pretty simple, pretty straightforward. And from there, those resources broaden out and you can dive a little bit deeper, some of which are with the webinars that Inside Outside's been hosting.
And Liza just put that in the chat for you, so you'll be able to link to that position statement. So the challenges of teaching outdoors in the winter, we want to start here because we know it's challenging. This is the time of year when we may have a love and not so much love relationship with this darkest time of the year. And we probably love our warm spaces to go into and our warm clothes and things like that. So we know we're aware of these challenges, and these actually are distilled from workshops I've been doing with teachers all over the state of Maine in public schools and throughout the country, really. And these are some of the common things people are saying. So we know these things, right? Getting buy-in from colleagues in administration, thinking about gear for all students and setting up gear libraries at the school or other kinds of access, thinking about harder to do just the set curriculum, things like just materials that you'll need to be able to bring outdoors. How do you do that in the wintertime and meet any performance standards that may be coming your way? In addition, like really thinking about how do we maintain and store that gear, and how do we work with all of that kind of big picture scheduling within a school, and then understanding and tracking the weather. So we're going to hope to touch on a bunch of these things today to support and help you. And please know that this is the beginning, right? So we're really trying to have this be a collaborative effort, and we'll be mentioning some resources that will be some follow-up pieces that can come from this as well. And so you may say challenges, those are a lot. That's a really steep, muddy hillside mountain to climb. I'm not sure I want to do that. So, however, as we know, children take the path of most resistance. So how can we support them in their learning where they're the most joyful and really the most healthy and safe? And the same goes for us. The most healthy and safe place we can be right now is outdoors. So how can we continue to do this and be working to support ourselves and hold ourselves in this time, which can be very challenging for our bodies. And we're going to help you do that. So let's look at some benefits.
All right. So the benefits of teaching outdoors in winter, we know these. I mean, you can read any kind of study, gather the data. But here's a really kind of quick list for all of you to remind you and to remind anyone that you're working with. Fresh air in winter is immune boosting. There's plenty of data on that. There's plenty of scientific evidence that shows more time outside in the fresh air decreases sickness and increases our resiliency to any kind of virus, and hopefully COVID as well. Vitamin D is free outdoors. I love this one. Although I think in the Northeast it's a little more challenging. You've got to have a lot more surface area to be absorbing that vitamin D, but we all know that that's very important. Motor skill engagement, core strength, and that core strength development leads to dynamic brain functioning. So when we think about a winter landscape as opposed to a summer landscape or even a fall landscape, the undulation of snowpack, how different types of snow, there's your science. How can children be moving through different types of snow? And what are those challenges? And what's being challenged in their motor skills to do that? When the ice packs down and turns to ice, then we're really calling in our core strength and our awareness of how to move across that. So a lot of opportunities within a winter landscape for motor skill engagement. Caring for self and self-efficacy. So if you just, I mean, even just in this picture, and as many in the pictures in today's webinar, you're going to be seeing how children are dressed. All that happens, for me, I work with public school teachers, so all that's happening inside the classroom. There's so much scaffolding that happens. How do we take care of ourselves? What do we need to be wearing? Do I put on my snow pants first or my boots first for the little ones? And even for older students as well, really looking at high quality insulating clothing and the differences between wool and cotton. Those can be even science experiments for themselves. So caring for self, and then the self-efficacy piece of children watching other children succeed. So that kind of vicarious piece of being outdoors, of watching other children succeed climbing up this hill, and then that social persuasion of, come on, we can do this, we're going to get to the top of the hill, and then we're going to get to base camp. So that development of self-efficacy. inspiration for learning in and with nature in the outdoors. Oh my gosh, winter can be challenging and winter can be absolutely gorgeous with snow crystals and light and animal tracking. There's so many curricular connections there that are awe and appreciation inspiring. And then I really would love for everyone to consider for yourself and for your students that learning outdoors in challenging weather helps and supports healthy bonding and attachment, not only between you and your students, but between students and between children and their families. So when we've been outside, I mean, for me, what I've noticed over the years is that our most challenging weather days are the days when children come back in the classroom, take all their clothing off, have so much appreciation for how well they did, how challenging it was, and that now they're back inside somewhere where it's warm and safe. And those are bonding and attachment moments that can last a lifetime for children. Those are lifetime memories for them. So those there we go with some benefits right there. And Anne and I were talking about this. I've been a little bit backing off from using the word resilient because I think we've been asked to be very resilient during this time during COVID. But if you consider this short list of benefits, they all lead to resiliency.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you for saying that, Amy. I think we all need to envelope each other in a large hug that we can't give each other. It's a tough time. And so hearing the word resilience is like, no more. we're all doing the best we can. So just acknowledge yourselves right now for doing the best that you can. And Amy and I really want to give at least hope that you'll end this webinar with some feeling of confidence in thinking about creating the walls of your classroom. That is often the thing that a lot of teachers will say, like stepping outside the school building, like I don't have the safety of those walls. So how do we create those? And we talk about that a lot when we're creating the outdoor classroom and thinking about how do you create that space through routines and rhythms. But this is another way to do it. And this is how you do it in winter. So really thinking about how to break that down. So as you can see, it's not 4 walls. We got a bunch of walls. Maybe it's round walls, but we're gonna create these walls with you today. And Amy and I will be kind of tag teaming this a bit. So I'll let you start, Amy.
So there's 5 walls here, and Anne and I, when we were creating this, she was looking at it through Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So those basic needs need to get met in order for us to achieve self-actualization. And I was looking at it through the sacred order of primitive skills and survival outdoors. So the first one, oxygen, right? We can't last without breathing. So when we think about oxygen, movement, physical activities, playing games outdoors, and also some time for mask breaks outside for breathing. So that type of movement is really, really important for staying warm outdoors.
I would say just take a breath right now, all of you, if you wouldn't mind. Give yourself a little more oxygen right now at the end of your work day. Shelter, it's vital for all of us, and we'll go through these different pieces, but the shelter can look really different depending on what kind of school you're working in or where you are, or if you're all outdoors, or if you're a half an hour outdoors, or if you're trying this for the first time. So that's going to look different. We'll talk about that. And then thinking about what might be going into our bodies to create warmth and protection in our bodies, both for clothing and then also food and drink. So we're going to move through these together over the next little bit. And Amy, I believe that you start.
Okay.
Oxygen. So take a breath, everyone.
Take a breath. So we'll have examples of this. So this idea of oxygen and movement in order for us to stay warm, and I put here as a subtitle, routines for keeping warm. So that that those constant routines, whether they are set routines every single time you go outside with your students, just like your routines that you have in the classroom of when are the high movement times, when are we going to move and warm our bodies, or when do we need to? Because I've done a monitor of check with all of the students, And this group of students over here need to get some more oxygen in them and need to be moving more to create some heat. So in some schools in Vermont and in Maine, we have ski programs. That's great movement. You can even see how these children are even dressed. I mean, one of them is not even wearing mittens, right? So they are moving their bodies. They are using their bodies to generate heat. And then this other photograph here, I have to share with you, I'm the adult in that photograph, and guess who was the coldest in that photograph and got that game going? Me. So I was very aware of myself, what my needs were for that day. I realized I didn't get a good night's sleep the night before. I didn't eat that well. I was rushed in the morning. This was a really cold day. And I'm there as the preschool teacher, and I'm thinking, I'm not going to make it through the morning unless I do something that's purposeful, fun, heavy work, and I'm using my muscles. So here we have a tire with a rope, and there you go. I particularly had a great workout that day, but again, really paying attention to when are the routines for movement. For us, in our programs that we work with public schools, we head out the door and we play a game immediately. We are moving our bodies. Some of that is for that mentoring and coaching and connecting with our students. And in the wintertime, it is for generating heat before we kind of move into the forest for snack and story.
I'll just add, Amy, right? Games are not just for preschoolers. So I think a lot of people think picture books are for elementary students and games are for young children, and simply not true. So there's wonderful games I play with my graduate students all right up through high school. And we did have some folks who are coming at this webinar from the secondary school level. So just know that we might have some pictures of younger children doing these things, but you absolutely can tailor games and mindfulness, breath, and that sort of teaching in the older grades as well. So in terms of shelter, like Amy and I were saying earlier, that shelter looks different in depending on where you are. The shelter may very well be the classroom or the inner hallway, right? As you're about to go outdoors, you know, if you need to shelter in place, the school building may be your shelter, and that is just fine. So I work all over the state, like I said, in all the in many public schools, 15 of them in 2 school districts. And so working with these teachers, that's what they're doing. They're not building some special building or putting up a yurt or creating anything different. They're just choosing a spot that is relatively accessible to their school building. So that becomes their shelter. In terms of other kinds of shelters, there are some schools that are getting a yurt or putting up a little cottage or a pavilion with sides, things like that, to be able to shelter at least from wind and rain. So there are places to do that. So this is kind of the shelter, the physical space. But in thinking about a shelter for your physical body, if you could advance, Eliza. Then, forgot that slide was there. Amy, put it in there. Why don't you go ahead, and then I'll talk about clothing. Go ahead.
Just that slide back there with the previous slide with the pavement, the paved asphalt playground, play space right up to the brick building on a sunny winter day. That is a very, very warm spot where you could have students outdoors doing a writing or read aloud or any kind of even direct math instruction. So that just points to that first piece on our list here of shelter considerations. So the solar gain. So really considering where is it that we're catching sun? In so many school buildings, there's all those little nooks and crannies where you could catch some warm sun on a winter day and be outdoors. Now this isn't in conjunction with a full day outdoor program or anything like that, but just a break to be outdoors during the day. So other shelter considerations are forest type. Am I in a deciduous forest where all the leaves have come down and we are getting sun, or am I in a coniferous forest where there's deer beds? And that's where the deer go in the wintertime because there's not as much snow on the ground. And it's a food source for them. Yet on a cloudy, cold winter day, that is a very cold place in a coniferous forest. So one of my favorite ideal situations, actually at one school at Berrytown Elementary School, is their meeting area is in a coniferous forest, and right next door is an old beach stand. So in the wintertime, you'll see the children kind of be going back and forth into a sunny area, and then our meeting area in the coniferous area where there's not as much snow. So other shelter considerations are weather patterns for your region. I know from one school to the next in Vermont, wind speeds, wind directions, snowfall, anything like that can be very different. So really understanding what are the weather patterns of your region. Water slope and understory, what does that look like? So in performing your site assessments in the fall before you've headed out with students, really considering what is underneath our feet and how will that change in the wintertime? What will get buried? What will get snowpacked, slippery, and icy? Another consideration is it a high use area? We do use some public parks where a lot of people walk their dogs, and that snow gets compacted, melts, and then refreezes. So it can become very, very slippery. So really considering how much are we impacting this area with whatever the precipitation is that has fallen on the ground. And finally, but this should be at the top of the list, is access for all. So considering who your students are, what their needs are, and how will they be able to access the outdoors. If you have a student that uses a wheelchair, how are they going to access your outdoor space in winter? If you have children who have different mobility issues, how are they going to access that? If you have children that are outdoors for a short amount of time and need to get back for services, how are you going to move from point A to point B? Because it will take longer in the wintertime with snow pants and boots and mittens and snow and ice and all of those things. So access for all is another very important shelter consideration.
Yeah, thank you, Amy. So here's the clothing. Speaking of access for all, so teachers and administrators and school communities have gotten very creative in this past few months. I've heard some pretty remarkable stories. Speaking of which, there will be over the next series of weeks here, we'll be having some case studies that will be posted on the Nature-Based Education Consortium website. And perhaps, Liza, you could drop that link into the chat, because those stories really are helping to illuminate what schools are doing, at least across the state of Maine, so that other teachers can bring that to their communities. And it's certainly not on the backs of the teachers. It's not on the backs of the families. This is a community effort in getting clothing and that shelter for our bodies available to the schools. So please, if you've got some things that your schools have done, you can drop those ideas and thoughts into the chat as far as getting gear closets and such developed in the schools and access to that gear. We live in a country of plenty, and so really it's about getting access to that plenty for every child, because if they are prepared to be outdoors, they can stay outdoors, and that's just a fact. So in these pictures here, one where their child is lying on the ground, it is quite chilly on that day, but is able to alternate mittens back and forth and being able to do some learning to pay attention and to see and to be able to record what she's seeing on the forest floor there. Some of you may have seen that in the New York Times. It was just a produced article all about teaching in winter. Juniper Hill was there among many schools throughout the region. And then in the other picture, those children, that was not we're gonna sit down for a 45-minute story. That was, we played a movement game and there was tea on board. You can see some thermoses on the ground there, and children had a snack and they're dressed appropriately. And that was a 10-minute, if that 6-minute story there. But there's a lot of movement that had gone into allowing them to be able to be sitting down. But again, you can see the clothing that they're wearing being conducive to doing that. And that is a community effort. So here we go. Drinking tea, Amy. You're muted, lady.
Thank you. I think that's like the saying of 2020. You're on mute. I just saw a question pop up in the chat box about how to stay warm when eating outside. So, okay, lots of strategies here, but let's go back to this framework that Anne and I are sharing with you. This framework, these 5 walls of the classroom, so to speak, for teaching outside. These are all the things to really like put in your pocket and carry with you as you're planning and as you're moving outdoors for any extended period of time that's longer than recess with students. So like Anne said in that previous slide, movement before food and drink, movement before a focused lesson, all of those things. So in these slides here, we have these are 5th and 6th graders. And so they have already had a game movement learning activity. They have actually hiked a pretty good distance because they're older students and they have access to a place where they can get to. So they've generated a good amount of heat, and tea has just become a routine. And with many of the classrooms that we work with, large thermoses brought outside with warm, nourishing tea. I really stay away from hot chocolate and the sugar because it burns fast, like softwood kindling, and then it's gone. So any kind of ginger, honey, milk, always considering allergies, or foraging throughout the forest. There's another lesson. There's a focused activity that involves movement that has a phenomenal outcome, something warm to drink. There are so many extensions around tea. And having a warm beverage, but it's one of the favorite routines that we have. And that hydration is also extremely important for keeping us warm. I know for me personally, and I really want to encourage all teachers, all educators, all adults, everybody that's here today, is to consider who they are in outdoors and challenging weather and what are your edges, and learn what do you need to stay warm and stay focused and be there for your students, not only for yourself, but your students. And I know for me, hydration is number one. If I start to get cold outside, it's because I haven't been drinking. Now, the other side of this is using the bathroom. So kind of monitoring that and understanding who your students are, and then access to bathroom space. So
And for yourself.
And for yourself too.
Teachers are well known not to drink anything so they don't have to use the bathroom, but that will make you cold immediately. So getting plenty of hydration on board and trying to find the support so that you can also use the bathroom in addition to the children. And I think it's good to note that winter doesn't always mean snow. So some of our coldest days are when there isn't snow on the ground. So making sure that you've got some insulated inserts in boots is another great long. You can get ones that are just a synthetic material or ones that are from wool and that sort of thing. So sharing that with families is a really helpful one. The distance off the ground can be really helpful, especially for teachers because we're standing around more than the children are. So in terms of food, food is a tricky one in a lot of the schools that I am now working with. Obviously, food isn't something that can be offered in ready amounts necessarily in schools that we're working with. However, there have been some marked changes in some of that since COVID began in terms of getting lunch and snack and breakfast programs really considering being outdoors. So there have been some pretty trailblazing cafeteria crews and food service in some of the schools I've been working in that have said we need to have more protein on board and more fats on board and less sugars and carbohydrates that are just burning through, and the kids it isn't lasting for them. So they're doing a little bit of research on that and thinking about what kids need to be able to be outside for an hour or 2 hours of a school day. So we even had a teacher workshop the other day where someone said, like fat nuggets, like all the, those little nuggets of coconut oil and oats and honey and whatever else and different seeds and nuts, obviously considering allergies as well. But we can make those, and we could make those as another class project when we're talking about what the birds need to survive the winter. We can be doing that for ourselves. And I said, exactly. So again, another curricular extension. So these are pictures of little individual trail mix containers that belong to each one of the children at Juniper Hill School. Has a symbol that is theirs, and they have from the time that they're young right up through 5th grade. So you can see some of the children there, the moths and the mice and the other things. So, okay, keep on moving. Oh, the best part. We get to go.
Oh, the best part. And I just want to add one thing as far as the science around children and how well they're able to stay warm outdoors, and the importance of the movement and the drink and the food is that children have a higher fat to muscle ratio than adults do. So adults have the muscle to be able to stay warm and children don't. So that's a consideration. Also, children have a higher surface area for losing heat. So making sure that that surface area is covered. We didn't really talk specifics on clothing yet, but wow, neck warmers, that's my number one. And hoods are not hats. So when we consider surface area for children, making sure that those surfaces are completely covered. Neck warmers, wow. I mean, I've probably taught the first 4 years maybe without really considering neck warmers.
Yeah,
Big
Amy, can I
difference.
just add that we had a community group that made neck warmers out of long bolts of fleece that were donated, and then they made neck warmers and they put an extra pocket in. I recommended a little extra pocket that they can put a reusable or a disposable hand warmer in as well, so that it hits that
Awesome.
another next level. So
That's so great.
schools are getting really creative. Right, we're.
Oh wait, you didn't talk about you got to go back to the other
We gotta
stuff.
go back to sleep. Yeah, it's really important. Eliza's skipping right through. So we've got sleep, rest, rejuvenation. Even if they're 10th graders, it's a really important time for being able to just take a break, a mindfulness break, a solo break with a journal, a time for a read aloud, being able to have them do some independent reading. And yes, that is a child napping. After 10 years of running the school, we did have children napping outdoors in sleeping bags, in their hammocks, in their clothes, with their slippers on, just not their boots. And they were very warm and definitely slept. But that, that's next level. You don't start there. Just starting with some being able to sleep for short periods of time indoors is completely fine. But then being able to work toward these resting breaks. So being able to rest means that our body has an opportunity to repair itself. And that's at night, as well as having some restful breaks during the day. So Amy, I don't know if there's anything else you want to add there.
Just I think nap is feels like an obvious like rest rejuvenate time in your routines with students, but what does that look like with older students, and how does that play out? I mean, I'm sure I know some schools in Vermont do have hammocks for all their students. I'm not sure if they're staying up for the winter and how they're utilizing them. I mean, that certainly looks cozy, but in your routines, when is there time for rest and rejuvenation? In that middle photograph, again, our routines are out the door, hike to base camp, play a game, get movement going, get that oxygen, get our bodies warm, and then settle in for snack and a story. So in that middle photograph, children are both resting and rejuvenating their bodies by drinking tea, taking in a healthy snack, and also calming their bodies a bit. And I just really, really want to invite everybody here today to consider, what does that look like as we head into the winter and teaching during COVID? What does sleep, rest, rejuvenate, and tending your inner fire mean to you personally as an educator, either during the day or at home at the end of the day? Really important.
Absolutely. Sorry, I'm just responding to the chat. You can grow tea in your school gardens, because school gardens are a big part of a lot of people's school culture now. And so if it is, tea gardens can be a great thing. That's what I was trying to write in the chat. So we'll move right along into teaching in winter. Curriculum work is extensive. These next 3 slides are packed with pictures. And as I said to some of my colleagues in middle and high school, Juniper Hill School is pre-kindergarten through 5th grade. So that's a majority of what I draw from, but much of this can be scaled up depending on what the science standards are, or what your literacy standards are, or where you're at in your curricular work. You can absolutely scale up what I've got going on here on some of these slides. So there's everything from snow explorations to tracking to hibernation, and looking at what non-mammal hibernators are doing, what mammal hibernators are doing, really focusing it to your place and where you are. And then making sure that whatever it is that the children are doing, they're active in doing it. So Eliza, we can go into the next slide, and Amy, I'll stop talking so you can say it a little something. But I just wanted to say that being as active as possible when they're doing it means that they will have plenty of that inner fire for being able to listen to a 10-minute or a 5-minute didactic lesson, like one of our teachers here is doing. She's now one of our co-directors at the school, talking about, you can see, if you squint a little bit, you can see a beaver trail there, and that is, they're sitting on top of the beaver entry point where the beaver was going into the house. There's a marsh behind them. And so really able to watch this activity over time means that so many inquiry, so many questions come up. They're problem solving, they're wondering, all of those pieces. And then this just launched a very long and really involved beaver study, actually. So Amy, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, when we think about being safe, comfortable, and engaged outdoors, the scaffolding that you do as a teacher in the classroom will support being safe, comfortable, engaged outdoors. So that we are not having, we're not teaching outdoors in isolation, that we are using the shelters, right? Back to that the 5 walls, using the shelter, the indoors of your classroom, or your virtual learning, or remote learning with your students, to generate interest and generate that spark, that little bit of fire, that inner fire, so that when they do go outside, they are engaged and they are dressed comfortably, ready for the weather, and then they will be safe. So that engagement is really, really important. We see, recess is short, right? Recess is not that long. Engagement is kind of like this, and definitely gets boring for students. Not to mention playgrounds get packed down with unsafe snow and unsafe surfaces and all of that. So therefore, our risk of being injured, lack of engagement, anything like that goes up, as well as behaviors that are a little more challenging. So really being intentional on what kind of inquiry, problem solving, and investigation do you want to bring into the classroom before you go outdoors, so children will be inspired to learn outdoors and engaged. Engaged children who are dressed well are not cold.
Great. And the extensions go far and wide. I would say that children at recess, you were talking about, it can absolutely get sort of same and flat and all of that. We don't have any traditional playground equipment at Juniper Hill School. Instead, they've got sticks and large snowballs. So immediately it becomes a question of how do we move this huge snowball? And then you've got just STEM all over the place, trying to figure out how they're going to move these big snowballs. And this is at playtime, but we take those extensions and use them when we're creating curriculum for the kids and thinking about simple machines or other ways to use science in those ways. So I think that the children's play can be pretty helpful. So when they are in movement, or they're in a free play movement time, or in a game, and what are the questions that they're asking? How are they moving? What are they wondering about? And taking those to create curriculum and really aligning those to state standards or other kinds of expectations that your school may have. And doing those kinds of brainstorms for yourself as a teaching team can be really helpful. I did this recently with a school when they were thinking about, they're trying to move from didactic sort of canned curriculum into project-based learning, or return to, as many of us know, return to project-based learning at this particular public school nearby where I live here in Maine. And they're really looking at, they wanted to sort of focus on resilience as this question keeps coming up, and thinking about how animals and plants survive in harsh environments. They live in a place where there are a lot of bogs and that kind of environment, in addition to being in Maine. So they really started to brainstorm and said, this is so fun to do this. And I said, yeah, it's so fun for your kids to do this. And this is the kind of brainstorming that can happen. And wintertime just provides so many opportunities for that.
Hey, guess what, Anne?
What? We're close, aren't we?
We are doing so good on time.
Good, because that means we get to involve these wonderful teachers who've been asking such great questions in the chat box.
So we just want to share one more thing with you, slightly interactive, but there's so many of you that what we want you to do is take a look at what the weather today is going to be. This is a weather scenario, and jot down some notes. You're going to have about a minute or so to jot down some notes of what your plan would be for this day, what the students might be wearing, things that you're going to want to consider for the day, and what you might change. So I'm not going to read the slide to you. You can read the slide for yourself. There's also the Beaufort scale there on wind speeds that was developed in about 1805 to help sailors look at wind speeds and effects. And if you want to utilize National Weather Service in any way to help you answer this, you may. But take 1 minute right now.
Amy, I think you should show the National Weather Service NOAA.
Slide, sure, yep. Yeah, we can afterwards.
Yeah. So Eliza, if you want to cue that up, the website there, that would be great. Not right this second, but in a minute.
This is a great exercise for considering what your students would be wearing that day, what you might be wearing, how you might alter your plan. Fahrenheit, yes, Fahrenheit. All right. Well, Anne, how about you share what you think about this weather scenario?
Oh, geez.
This is my slide, so I get to ask you.
Yeah, great. Put me on the spot. So, well, when I took a look at this, I feel like this is the kind of thing where the second that I see high winds coming in, I'm going to shape my day around that. So that's hazardous weather. That goes up into what we call a moderate gale, in which case we're going to shift our activity completely and we're going to be indoors. And we may even consider being not indoors in the yurts, but indoors where there's actually a roof, because things are coming down from the trees at Juniper Hill School at that kind of wind speed. So we're gonna be outside in the earlier part of the day, and yes, it's going to be cold. So we want to make sure that we're dressed for that day, making sure we have on base layers and warmer clothes and things. If base layers are not a possibility, we're going to shorten our time. So depending on what kind of school you work in, you can either mandate what children are wearing or not. And if you can't do that, then you've got to moderate how much time, modify how much time you're going to be spending outdoors and what you're going to be doing there. So it would be an active lesson. I certainly would have them be combing the trees perhaps and doing some active exploration of the trees. And we might even take photographs and go inside to draw, depending on how prepared the children were with materials such as, adequate gloves or adequate base layers or hats or not cotton sweatshirt hoods, that sort of thing. So we want to make sure that we're paying attention to that. If they're adequately dressed, you can be outside for a short period of time for sure, and do that drying and switch hands with their mittens. Maybe they even have hand warmers or a warm cup of tea to wrap their hand around.
Great. And I'm going to add a couple more things. And if you have suggestions or ideas that you'd like to share in the chat box, please do so. If there's something that's really sticking out to you, I just want to go back to that first paragraph there. That's kind of a trick. That's kind of a trick paragraph there. I'm wondering if anyone caught on to that. It's the first real snowstorm of the season, and I put December 9th there. So in working with public schools, I know that many children do not get their winter clothing until Christmas. So their new mittens or their new hat or their any new boots, anything, that is a Christmas present for them. So, and it's also the first real snowstorm of the season. So many parents may have not even been, families are not prepared yet. So that's looking at what are you prepared for clothing, what are you able to supply for your students before everyone has all of their clothing that they need. So that is a little bit earlier on the clothing part. And then also, it's 20 degrees at noon and the school day starting off in single digits, yet with sunny skies. And I go back again to that slide on shelter with that asphalt top. And then the school building south facing, that might be a great place to settle in after Anne's plan of doing movement and active exploration in the forest, yet still be able to stay outside and gain some of that solar heat in that corner of the building. And that you could potentially do journaling outdoors. On this day, I probably wouldn't be doing journaling outdoors. It's going to be potentially a little bit breezy before those gusts roll in and it's cold out. So making that's the thing about teaching outside all the time, but especially as the weather starts to change, is how flexible are you, and how quickly can we alter what our plans are, and how well prepared are our students and ourselves for the weather?
I would also say, Amy, this is very appropriate. I work with high school teachers, and this is very appropriate to be doing very specific academic time with the students in short spurts. I've been working with a 7th and 8th grade group and also a 9-12 group of teachers, and they are just adjusting their curriculum and finding the active components of what they could do. So whether it's an experiment or setting up an observation like a game camera over time, and being able to have those active explorations, and then do some of the if they have to do a didactic piece on with technology and that sort of thing inside, but at least they've been out for a 40-minute period of a double period kind of scenario. So I just wanted to acknowledge some of our colleagues who are on this call who are teaching older students.
Yeah. And also someone dropped in the chat box, the joy of the first snow. I mean, really, you are not stepping out the door and doing a focused lesson. You are stepping out the door and playing. Everybody is. From preschool to 12th grade, everyone's playing on the first snow day, especially when it's dry, fluffy snow as well. So,
yeah,
all right.
Absolutely. Thank you. Eliza or Liza, could one of you open the NOAA weather just quickly?
Yep, and we've got 10 minutes.
Yeah, we're going to go a Q&A after this real quick. I just want to give a visual. We're going to Tunbridge, Vermont.
This is my absolute favorite weather site. I don't use anything but the National Weather Service or NOAA, and I have the NOAA app on my phone. And yes, I do pay for it because I feel it is essential for me being able to safely track the weather outdoors while I'm outdoors with students. It's a radar.
Eliza, could you scroll down to the hourly?
Yeah.
And just right there where it says hourly, go, yeah, right in the middle there, hourly weather forecast under additional forecast and information. This is your best friend. So being able to look at your hourly forecast, and I do this on a Sunday night before school begins and also every day, and then throughout the day, so you can have that up for yourself to be able to track what's happening with the weather. And it's a great thing for older students for a couple kids for that to be their job. So it's been a great one to do with middle elementary all the way up through high school. So thanks for showing that. We're going to go to Q&A.
And just in addition, and one of an NGSS science standard for kindergartners is being able to plan for severe weather events. Understand and plan for severe weather events, which seems a bit of a stretch for kindergartners. But if you follow that thread through NGSS, what you will find is that performance expectation leads to learning about and understanding global climate change. So the opportunity to be checking weather and understanding weather with students from a very early age is just a further connection to nature and to us bonding and having healthy attachment to the outdoors.
All right, so there are a few questions here that a couple I think you touched on a little bit, but one question around diapers, and some folks shared the idea of pop-up tents, but diapering outdoors.
So I just shared that I do know a couple of folks who have who put in like a little warming, somebody had a little extra garden shed that they brought, and they put a little propane heater and were able to get that's a public, not a public, but a daycare that's like a Head Start connected kind of daycare. And they were able to get that kind of thing certified. So Amy, I don't know if you have any other thoughts.
I've only changed my own children's diapers outside, and that was 20 years ago. So I don't, unfortunately, I have nothing to add to this, but if someone else does, it would be great if you wanted to put that in the chat box.
Well, and just one thing, I mean, I think one of the things that you alluded to earlier, everything doesn't have to happen outside too. So if you stay outside for most of your day and the one part that you have to do inside is diaper changing, then you're doing pretty darn good, I'd say.
Yeah.
Another question was around sort of like thinking about curriculum lessons that can happen outdoors in winter when there isn't snow.
Yeah, so there's so many. I think that one of the things I love to do with students is thinking about tracking that's not in snow. A lot of people think, oh, it's just in mud, and when you see the actual track on the ground, but really seeing tracking in terms of a landscape, and what also ways that you can track and understand what animal movement, and plants and what's happening in our forests just with the tracks of a storm, for example. So there's wonderful ones like that. In addition, I think being able to see survival, in terms of not in the subnivean zone, but in the subterranean zone, and thinking about what animals are doing in the wintertime when there isn't snow, how to involve that sort of ecological concept as well. There's many. I mean, Amy, I'm sure you can.
Yeah, I mean, really straight to the heart is what are the other non-humans around us doing right now, and how are they surviving? I know we in the past have used QFT, which is a question formulation technique to inspire and engage learning in young students and as well as in older students, but looking at by posing a statement. So deer survive in winter, right? I'm pretty sure most of you have some type of mammal that lives close by, even in urban settings. So how are they surviving? And the connection that we're able to make there is not only meeting science performance expectations, but also empathy for other living things. And how do we survive through the winter? How do they survive through the winter? So there's lots of possibilities there. My go-to, if people don't know about Juliet Robertson and her website, Creative Star Learning, if you don't have snow and you're wondering, what do I do in cold weather? Go directly to that website. You will get lost very quickly. And there is so much information there, and so many inspiring quick activities that can happen on the asphalt right outside the school, or can be integrated into a full day outside. So Creative Star Learning Company, I think maybe Eliza will drop that into the box there. So I'd really look at connections to other living things. Yeah. As a great starting place.
And it's a great time to look at non-living as well. I mean, abiotic kinds of times, we're in that as well. Death is a really important study in the wintertime. We do a lot of death study.
Wait, I gotta say one more thing. Properties of matter. Are you serious? I mean, yes. If you don't have snow, you can at least freeze some things, like freezing, thawing, all of that science around that. That's another really great, addition.
There's wonderful things popping up in the chat as well. So take a look at what your other colleagues are saying. Other questions, Liza?
Yeah, so there's another question about keeping kiddos warm. So this balance between rest and movement, and how to keep them warm and not resting too much. And like, how do you, I suspect what I was reading into this, what is that fine line and how do you determine?
Well, if you go back to those 5 walls of the classroom, and really we have oxygen first, but the second one is shelter, right? So go back to that. It's like shelter for the body, clothing. You're going to start with clothing. Like what kind of access do you have to clothing, and what are the needs? What types of clothing do you need for the region that you are living in? Okay, that's different. Like what children in Vermont and Maine need for clothing can be slightly different than what children in Virginia need, than what children in a drier winter climate like Wyoming need, right? So you absolutely start there. And the other thing I would add in is really considering who are your students, what are your resources for clothing, and what are your routines? What are your routines outside, and how are those routines helping keep your students warm? Sometimes in the wintertime, we don't do sit spots outside. We don't do sit spots. The last thing I want is children sitting on the ground in a stationary position for 5 to 15 minutes having a mindfulness activity, unless it's a really warm, sunny March day where the snow is melting out. But really considering what your routines are as well.
Yeah, and thinking about what they're sitting on too can be helpful. We've made some Ziploc, and a lot of teachers have made these with Ziploc bags with newspapers in them, or some sort of like little sit upon type thing that they're insulating themselves from the cold ground when they're sitting for any length of time. But again, they're not sitting. And in the hammocks, you get them up off the ground, and then they're in these cozy kind of nooks essentially, but they need to be warmer than you think they need to be when they get in there, because they're going to cool down a lot. So any
Yeah,
other questions? Yeah.
I was just gonna say, and I don't know that there's an exact formula when people say, how long can children be outside in the wintertime? You as a teacher and educator, you are so tuned into investigating. You know who your students are. Now take those 5 pieces of the 5 walls of the classroom for winter and apply those to your investigations, and really go just that next like level under the snow, go a little bit deeper to understand who your students are and how will you function outside. Also scaffolding time outside, like we're going to go out for this amount of time, and build your stamina to be outside for longer periods of time.
And also we make it so that children always have to ask before they take off any gear at all, so that we're actually in charge of that piece of it, especially with the youngest children. And then they be able to tell what their body temperature is and what it's doing. And we have a place for that. So we have gear stumps or areas where they will put those materials, so they're not just putting them anywhere. Other questions, Liza?
I think you all have tackled everything here. It's been like amazing collaboration between what you both are sharing and then folks answering in the chat box, which is great.
That's so great. I want to read the chat box.
I know, it's so good. It's going to get recorded and all that, right? I love it.
Yeah, so we're recording this. We'll put it up on the website and Facebook page. Give us a few days. It'll take a little while for us to get to it, but we will. And also we'll have a virtual roundtable happening December 17th. So look for some details on that, and another one January 14th, and it'll cover all different ages. So if you have questions that you feel like you need to hash out a little more, we'd invite you to join one of the virtual roundtables. A huge thank you to Anne and Amy for sharing their time and giving all of their wonderful resources and ideas. I feel like it's endlessly helpful.
Eliza, will you go to that last slide?
Yeah, there's one more slide we just want to share with all of you. We've seen this question come up a lot about fire. We even shared photographs with you today, images of fire, and just to walk away today that fire within first. So how do we generate and tend our own fires to stay healthy through this coming season of winter, and being with our students and being outdoors? And then how do we help children create that fire for themselves inside? And again, just to go back to those 5 walls of the classroom, those all can be generating heat for them, and let that fire warm you and help you care for others, and model that for your students. Just a little heads up, we are talking about offering a online fire safety webinar, and we've held off on it because it's very, very important that we want to make sure that people do it safely, do it with integrity, and capture all the magical learning that can happen with that. But we want you to walk away today with fire within first, and tend your own fire.
And absolutely, so that this is accessible for children in urban environments and in rural environments and everywhere in between. This is a very important part to the growth of this movement. So thank you all so much for your time on a busy Tuesday, and for your dedication to this work. This is an exciting time for all of us who've been doing outdoor learning for a long time, and we just want to be here to support you. So be in touch.
Great. Thanks, everybody. Thank you so much. Be well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie.